So, first of all, what is Qualtrics? Some of you will know, some of you might have used it, some of you might not. So, Qualtrics is a survey tool. It's one of two survey tools that we support at the university, the other one being Google Forms. And here, I just thought I'd start down with a little breakdown of what the difference between the two of them are. So, thinking about Google Forms, first of all, the strength of that is that it's quick and easy to use. It's very intuitive, user-friendly. It's quite easy to lock down to University of York members if you want a survey just to be internal to the university. You can get it to collect York email addresses automatically. You can get Qualtrics to do that. It just takes a few more steps. And you can also output in real time to Google Sheet is one of the real strengths of it. Qualtrics, basically, I would say Google Forms can probably do the job 80% of the time. Probably easier to use, easier to pick up, but Qualtrics does have a bit more depth and functionality. So if you reach a point where you think Google Forms isn't going to do the job, that's when I would consider Qualtrics. So it has more question types than Google Forms, and allows rich text editing, which we'll demo a little bit when we get started. It's got advanced branching options, so that's sort of branching your logic if you only want certain people to answer certain sections and so on. And you can also do quite fancy things with embedded data from a contact list. So if you want your survey to look different to different people, depending on certain features like what department they're in or things like that, you can do that with embedded data. You can also send out timely scheduled reminders and follow-up emails and so on. In terms of what it looks like, if I just bring up a side-by-side demo. So to the left, this is what Google Forms looks like if you're filling in a Google form. I'm sure you've probably all seen this before. Here's the same form on the right that's been built with Qualtrics. So again, you may have seen this before, and you may have seen a form that looks like this without realizing it had been built with Qualtrics. But yeah, that's kind of how it would generally look, although there are some customization options for the look and feel, which we'll look at as well. Next question is, how do you get into Qualtrics? So what I would recommend is using the university's Qualtrics sign-in page, because if you just Google Qualtrics and go there, it's going to have a sign-in page, but that's not going to automatically be linked to your university license account. So the university has a license that allows everyone to have a Qualtrics account. But if you sign in this way, that's probably going to ask you to set up a free account or a trial, something like that. So if you go through the university's login, you won't have that issue. The easiest way would just be search Qualtrics on the university website. The top link there, we've got a web page about Qualtrics with this purple sign into Qualtrics button. You can bookmark that as well if it's something you're using regularly. But if you click on that, that's going to take you to a different looking login page. In fact, it's going to sign me straight in because I was already signed in. Let's demo that in an incognito tab, in fact. So I'll do the same again. Go to Qualtrics. This time, if I click sign in, it's going to take me to a familiar looking login page, and that is just your university username and password. So it looks like it's remembered that. I'll click login, and then it's going to be the old Duo two-factor authentication, which we all know and love. That's popped up on my phone, so I'm going to approve that. And then once it's loaded, then I'm into Qualtrics. Okay, so this is what Qualtrics looks like once you've signed in. So I've got sort of recently visited surveys. These might be ones I've created myself or ones that someone shared with me. There's widgets, there's information about any active responses to surveys I've got going on at the moment. There's all kinds of data, but what we want to demo is building a survey. So how do you do that? Well, down here at the bottom, I've got create a new project. So that's what I want to do. When I click on that, it's going to give me a few different options. I want to create one from scratch. There are ways to do it with imported data. If you have a survey that you've imported from elsewhere, but we're going to do one from scratch. I'm going to click on Get Started. I'm going to call it Cheese because I want to make a survey all about cheese. Again, you can import or use existing projects if you wanted to make a new version of an old one or something, but again, I'm just going to create one from a blank survey project. So once I click Create Survey, that is going to take me into, when it loads, it should be the survey editing interface. Okay, yeah, that looks about right. So here is where I can build my survey. Now, I mentioned it's maybe not quite as user-friendly as Google Forms in terms of simplicity. So there are lots of menus in lots of places. So part of the trick of getting to grips with Qualtrics is figuring out which menu you need to go into. So we won't cover it in detail, but just across the top, we've got Survey, which is the one we want to be in now to edit our survey. Workflows you can use to sort of set up triggers for your survey to do a certain thing at a certain time or after a certain number of responses. Distributions is how you send your survey out, which John's going to look at that later. And these last three are all concerned with looking at your results once you've got people actually filling in your survey, getting reports based on them and looking at your data. But I'm not going to look at those right now. I'm going to stay in survey. You've then got this other menu down the left within the survey section. Builder, that's where you build the survey. So that's what we're going to stay in for the first bit. Survey flow is where you add your logic and branches, which we'll look at soon. Look and feel does what it says on the tin. You can change how the survey looks. Survey options is how you can customize the settings. And quotas, again, I think John's going to touch on briefly. Translations is if you need to translate into a different language. But we're going to stay in Survey Builder because we want to start building our survey. So you'll see it's added a question automatically. So I've got a question here. My first question, I'm just going to click in this box. I'm going to type what I want it to be. So quite a simple one. Do you like cheese? Okay. Now Qualtrics has tried to be clever and give me some automatic options, but I want to set these options myself. So if I am in a question, you'll also see this, which is the edit question menu. And this gives me lots of options. So the first thing is deciding which kind of question I want it to be. Could be multiple choice. I might be ranking things in order. There's all kinds of options down here. Could be a text entry. I could just get people to write yes or no or a little bit. I'm going to put it as multiple choice just because that is better in terms of being able to group your responses and add branching logic. If you leave it open as a text field, obviously, if somebody puts yes and somebody puts yeah, they're going to be counted as different answers and they're not going to be all easy to group together in your reporting. Whereas if you restrict the options with multiple choice, that way you're going to be able to group the answers nice and easily. So I think it's quite a simple question though. I'm just going to overwrite these options. I think that is a simple yes or no question. So I'm actually going to remove those last two choices. Do you like cheese? Yes or no? Straightforward one. I could choose whether I want to allow multiple answers. Don't think that would really make sense with this question. I think you only want to allow one answer. This is just another place where I can add and remove options. I can change how it looks, so I could turn that into a drop-down. That would be useful if you had a really long list of options and you didn't want people to have to scroll through the whole thing. Or you could have it as a box where you select one. I'm going to keep this as a list. You could change the alignment, make it horizontal or a column. Again, it might take a bit less scrolling space. I think vertical is fine here. Response requirements. This is where I set whether the question is mandatory or not. So if I toggle on this option, it's going to give me two options. Forced response means that someone filling in the survey has to complete that question. So it will not allow them to progress to the next bit of the survey unless they give an answer. Request response doesn't force them to, but if they try and click through without answering the question, it'll just give them a prompt to say, oh, we'd like you to fill that question in. Could you please fill it in? But they can still ignore that. And you can customize the text that appears there. I'm going to put that as false response because I think that's a pretty important question. Add validation, we'll come on to that later. So that's my first question. Next question, I'm going to add, this time I'm going to make it text entry. I'm going to say, what is your favorite type of cheese? Now, one thing I should mention as well that you can do in Qualtrics is you can use the rich content editor to sort of fully customize what's appearing in your text box or your question. So I might want to set that to do a different font, make it bold, make it a bit bigger. You can even add images and videos and various things. You can add in links. So this is something which is a little bit more advanced than its equivalent in Google Forms. So I've made that one look a little bit different. What is your favorite type of cheese? I could do multiple choice, but then I'd have to think of every cheese that exists, which can take me quite a long time. So I think this time I will just leave it as text entry. I can choose whether I want that to be multiple lines of text, a single line or an essay, and you can adjust the size of the box accordingly. If I click and drag that, that's gonna, if you want people to write an essay, the size of the box often dictates how much people write. But I think actually a single line is enough for that question. This time I'm just gonna make it request the response. Okay, so I'm happy with that question. But actually this question, what's your favorite type of cheese? If somebody's put they don't like cheese, that doesn't really apply to them, does it? So I think I only want people to answer that if they've said yes to do you like cheese. So I want this to be in a different question block. It's the first step. So I'm going to add a block. I'm going to call it cheese lovers. And this section will just have questions that are answered by the people who do like cheese. So I've created that block. And now I can move this question. Just click and drag to move your questions around to where you want them. Okay, and you can see there it's moved into this block. Going to add another question in this block, which is how many times a week do you eat cheese? Now, what type of question should I use for this? I could do multiple choice and put 0, 1, 2, but again, how high should I go with that? It's difficult to know what the maximum number of times a week you should eat cheese. You can do sliders, so you could give that option. That's more really for when you're giving a ranking or a rating for something, so I don't think that's quite appropriate. I'm going to keep it as text entry for now. I'm going to request a response again. But the thing is, if I just put that as text entry, someone might put 4, but someone might write the word 4, or someone might write lots. And then again, that's not going to help me group my data. So I want to restrict it a little bit. And that is where add validation comes in handy. So if I toggle that on, that's going to give me a new menu where I can basically add validation that's going to restrict what kind of responses they can give to this question. So it could be a minimum or maximum character length. It could be content type. It might be that you want an email address to be the only way you can fill in that question, a phone number, and so on. But this wants to be a number, doesn't it? What I need in that box is a number. I think the minimum should be 0. I don't want any negative numbers in there. I'm not going to set a maximum because I don't, like I said, I don't want to judge anyone who's eating cheese 200 times a week. Decimals would be how many decimal places. Can't really eat cheese 2.5 times a week, can you? So we're not going to allow any decimals. Okay, so I've added that validation there. I think I want to ask some questions to the cheese haters now. So I'm going to add a new question block for cheese haters. I'm going to add a question within that block. This time I'm going to make it multiple choice because it's going to be why don't you, I could spell you, like cheese. Now again, it's tried to be clever with those options, but they don't quite work, do they? I want to define those options. I'm going to say too smelly could be an option. Don't like the taste. Scared of it. Allergic. I'm going to remove that choice. You might also want to have an other option, which is, hang on, let me add a new option. So if I change this option to be allow text entry, and I put other, when I click away from that, you'll see a little text box has appeared there. So that's how you add basically a custom field to a question. If you want people to be able to choose another option and fill in some detail themselves. So I've added that, and that was, like I say, click on the option itself and allow text entry. You can even set the size of that box and validate that in some way if you want to. Now, there's still something that I don't like about this question because people might want to choose more than one of these options. They might think it's too smelly and they might be scared of it. But we know intuitively when we see these round buttons, that usually means you can only select one. I'm going to allow multiple answers, and you will see Qualtrics has automatically changed that to these more square boxes. It's just something we intuitively know. When we see the square boxes, we can put a tick in more than one of them. You can still change how that appears. You could have it as a select box. I'm going to keep it as a list. Could still move them around. I'm going to keep it as it is. But now that's going to allow them to select more than one option for that question. I'm going to make that a request response as well. You can add validation if you want them to select a specific number. You could say they have to select at least 2 of those, or it could be a range between 1 and 3, for example. But I'm not going to add any validation this time. Okay, I'm going to add one more block because this last block is going to be for everyone, whether they like cheese or not. Just going to call it final section. I'm going to add a new question, which is going to be a slider. How would you rate these types of cheese? So I want to find out whether people like vegan cheese or not, and compare that to how much they like non-vegan cheese. Get rid of that third option. Now within sliders, you could set a custom start position if you wanted to bias people to give vegan cheese a really high rating. You can change the number displayed across the top. I think 100's maybe a little bit too specific. I'm going to change that to, in fact, I'm going to change that to 5. Looks a bit weird because we've still got 10 grid lines. So let's change that to 5 grid lines. No decimals. You can add labels if you want, so people know sort of what their answers refer to. Dislike, neither like or dislike, like, something like that you could use. Yeah, so I'm happy with that question. So at this stage, you've added all your questions, you've added your blocks. You might want to have a look at what your form is going to look like for the end user. So that is when you hit this preview button. Now, if I click on this, that is going to display the survey as it appears to an end user. And helpfully, it also has how it would appear on mobile, because that's always worth taking into account. Some people might be filling it in on different devices. Does it still make sense and look okay on that device? And that's going to allow me to practice filling in the survey. So do you like cheese? I'm going to choose no. But that's taken me to this section. That was the cheese lovers section, wasn't it? I actually, I've forgotten to add in some logic to send people to the right section of the survey. So let me come back out of that. I need to jump into survey flow down this side. So survey flow is basically going to show the branching logic that applies to this survey. Know that? At the moment, there's just 4 blocks. There isn't any branches, but I want there to be some branches. So let's think about this. Let's add something below. I want a branch. So a new branch that's going to basically take people in one direction if they answer a certain way to a question, or in another direction if they answer a different way. So this is where I choose my if condition for this branch. So that could be based on things like embedded data. So if you had some data about the people, if you wanted everyone over the age of 30 to answer certain questions under the age of 30 and you had that data, there's ways to do that in Qualtrics. Or if you wanted specific stuff for different departments. But what I'm going to do is base it on their answer to this question. So question, do you like cheese? If they choose yes, so I've got the branch, but I haven't said where that's going to take them. Where I want it to take them is this block, the cheese lovers block. Now I can't just click and drag that up. What I have to do, if I go over to where it says move, you'll see that changes to that little compass icon. If I then drag and drop that, so that is now showing as being a branch there. So if yes is selected to do you like cheese, then it's going to show the cheese lovers block. Okay. So let's add another branch for the cheese haters. I want that to be up here. So do you like cheese question? If they select no, well then I want that to take them to cheese haters. Okay, I need to remember to select apply once I've done this. So I'll select apply. Okay. Now let's go back into the survey and let's preview it again. Now it's always worth testing your survey. If you are building logic into it, do as much testing as you can. Get your colleagues to test it because that's the best way to make sure it's functioning as you want it to. But now if I select do you like cheese? No. Right, so that's taken me to the cheese haters section. I can select up to 3 of those. And then it's going to bring me to this section. And then it takes me to the end of the survey. So it all seems to be working as I want it. I might want to restart and test answering different things. So if I put yes, that's going to take me to this part of the survey. It's then going to skip the cheese haters survey, the cheese haters section, which is what I want, and take me straight here. So that all looks as I want it to. So that was in survey flow. The only other thing I want to look at before I hand over to John is look and feel, because that is where you can customize the appearance of the survey. Now there's various options you can choose along here. In terms of theme, there's sort of custom loaded themes you can use. I'm using the university one here, but there's specific ones for the medical school, different departments. You can also create your own one, or you could even use any of Qualtrics' built-in ones. I'm going to stick with the university one. Layout. As soon as I click on that, it's now popping up asking me if I want to try the new simple survey layout. And it's got some little bump about why that's helpful. I'm going to ignore that suggestion for now, just so that I can demo the different options. But yeah, it's suggesting that I use this simple layout. So that looks like that. But I might want to use flat, modern. There's various options. Let's use the recommended one. Let's use simple. So general, this again, it's some more customization. You can change the text that appears for the things like the next button or the back button, which we haven't actually added yet. John's going to show you how to do that. Progress bar. Now, if you've got a long survey in particular, it's helpful for people to know how far through the survey they are, to know how much time they're going to have to spend on it. So I am going to add one. I'm going to add one with no text. And then that's going to show people, as they progress through the survey, the bar will move along. They'll have a sense of how long's left to go. You can add headers and footers. You might want to change the color scheme. Let's change it to be more of a cheesy color. You could even set the background to be a specific color if you really want. There's all kinds of customization you can dabble with. And again, you need to remember to select apply and then go back into your survey, preview it to make sure it's looking as you want it to. Doesn't seem to have saved my orange color, but it is. You'll see if I try and click onto the next page, it's asking me to make sure I fill that one in because that is required. If I choose that, it lets me continue. Now these ones I chose request response. If I try and skip to the next page, it's prompting me to fill them in, but it's not forcing me to. So I could select answer the questions, or I could continue without answering. So that's the difference between force response and request response. But yeah, generally I'm pretty happy with that form. The other thing you might find yourself wanting to do is collaborate with colleagues on a survey, whether that's you designing it together or you're analyzing the results together. You know, it might be a project or a team that you're working together on a survey. So to add someone to a survey, and just to be clear, this is to add them to be able to edit the survey and access the results. It's different to how you'd send it out for people to fill it in. So if I go on to tools at the top, then collaborate, that is going to allow me to search for someone to collaborate with. Now I'm going to do a search for John. And there he is. Took a while, but he appeared. Now, everyone should have a University of York Qualtrics account. If they've never logged into it, then technically that account might not have been created. So if you find that you can't find someone in the address book, it might just be they've never signed in. So you can prompt them to sign in. You can add external people as well, but they'll need to have their own Qualtrics account to be able to access it. But I'm going to add John. I can customize what he can do with the survey. I might say, okay, I want him to view it, but not edit it, or I don't want him to be able to copy or distribute it. Actually, I think I trust John enough to leave all these ticked. So I'm going to save that. And that should trigger an email to John to ask him to collaborate on the survey with me. So yeah, at this stage then, given that I've now shared the survey with John, I will stop sharing my screen and hand it back over to him.
So, as Simon's alluded to, half the battle with Qualtrics is just finding out where these different buttons live, because it is essentially Google Forms on steroids. It's not got that same level of user friendliness. So I'm at my dashboard here, and I will actually just allude to this at this point here. I'll make note of this. We've got this option to learn Qualtrics through their own self-paced courses. So, as it says here, if you do want to become a Qualtrics expert, there you go, you can do that. I can also see here in my important notifications that Simon has shared his cheese survey with me. We've also got a pizza party one and a fromage one. We don't just create surveys on food, I will add, but it does seem to be a common theme. So let me go into this one here, and let's open up this survey. Now, the first thing I can see is this big warning sign here to say multiple people are editing the survey and you might impact each other's changes. So be aware of that. If you have a form that you're collaborating on together, you can always see who's collaborating at the same time, and it may be worth perhaps reaching out to them if you are collaborating at the same time, just to tell each other what changes you're making, so you don't overwrite each other's changes. Okay, so I'm in this cheese survey. I want to have a look at the options, because we've shown you the basics of how to create a survey. We've got questions in, we've looked at validation and question types and so on, but we need to look at the deeper settings of how this survey is behaving. So we're sticking in our survey tab here, but this time we're going down to survey options. And this is essentially the equivalent of what settings would be in Google Forms. The first thing that jumps out to me on this page here is the display name. It's set up with Qualtrics's default display name. So if I was putting this on a social media post or on a browser tab, it looks a little bit spammy. It's not very nice. So let's call this Simon's Excellent Cheese Survey. And then it's going to be a little bit clearer what survey this actually is. We've also got this pre-defined survey description, the most powerful, simple, and trusted way to gather this experience data. Yeah, it's a bit gross as well, isn't it? That's a survey. What is about cheese? There we go. We've got a nice clearer description about what the survey is actually about. Those are two boxes that I see people missing out all the time, and it's hard to tell what people are actually doing their surveys about. So pay heed to those. I'm not going to cover every single option within options, because a lot of them are very self-explanatory and they've got a nice descriptor as to what they're about. But I want to show you where they are, and there's a couple that Simon and I have picked out that we really want to make you aware of and add some disclaimers. So we've got our base language, that's pretty obvious. We've got question numbers, again, pretty obvious. It's going to give questions some numbers. And our expert review, hopefully you saw that as it was going along. It was giving us recommendations as to what improvements we could make about the survey. That's on by default. So I'm happy with what we've got here. Let's leave general. That's nice and simple general. Let's go on to responses, because this is where we can start adding a little bit more. We can add a back button to allow people to go back. I always find that's quite user friendly, so I would probably pop on a back button in this instance. But it might be it's just worth paying attention here. This back button won't appear when you have survey flow elements between survey blocks. So let's keep it off for now, just because I know we've got some survey blocks, so I don't want to do anything too wild just yet. Of course, if I was building this form for real and not in demo, I'd do lots of user testing and lots of previewing in and out to make sure I was happy with the flow of this survey and that everything was working. An important button here, allow respondents to finish later. Are you locking them in so that they've got to do it in one setting, or are you going to let them finish it later? Again, by default, it's on. I think we're going to keep that on. Custom error messages is pretty much as it says. If you want to create custom messages to show when people try to skip past forced response questions or past request response questions, all those mandatory questions, we can set up our custom error message to do that. But this is quite an important one, Sam, and I wanted to highlight, was incomplete survey responses. We can choose here what to do with surveys where people have gone onto it, they've done a little bit, but they've been whisked away to something else and they haven't completed it. And what do we want to do with those? Do we want to record them, or do we want to delete them? So sometimes you'll find that you send out a big survey, someone's done a little bit of it and thought, oh, can't be bothered, going to leave it. And then when you go to analyze your data and everything like that, you've got all these dead responses that are in no way used to your data analysis. So what do we want to do with these incomplete survey responses? We could choose to record them still, and we can choose how long we want between that user starting the survey and them dropping it for them to be considered incomplete. We can change this time frame here, or we can just delete those. So anyone that hasn't completed it after 2 weeks, so they've been on it once, then 2 weeks later, not again, we want to delete that response. So that is very worthwhile to be aware of, that that is where you can choose what happens with these responses. And again, if you've got a timed survey, then again, you want to pay attention to that setting. And we can choose what sort of activity determines when we start the timer for that as well. Another really useful thing we have in Qualtrics that we actually don't have in Google Forms is the ability to set a specific start and expiration date rather than having to manually close our survey. So we can leave the survey open to collect responses, and that's there's other settings where we can just turn that off. We can just set to be inactive, that's fine. Or we can set our specific state and expiration date. So if I toggle that setting on here, you can see I've got a time, the survey start time, and the survey end time. We have this very important reminder here that time zone is based on your account settings. Now, we found that by default, your account settings for Qualtrics will be Utah time in the US. So you might be actually setting this, you think you're setting this to finish at 12 a.m., but in the UK, you're not. You're setting it for, well, 5 a.m. the next day, perhaps. So we need to be aware of what we're doing with our default account settings, and we can do that up in My Account. We can go to Account Settings. And then in here, I will be able to change my time zone. So look, oh no, look, I'm in US and Canada time, so that's no good. So let's go and find a more appropriate time setting for this area. We're not that way, are we? We want to go and see if we can find the UK. There we go, Dublin, Edinburgh, Lisbon, and London. Let's go for that setting there. I've also got English US on here, so I'd be spelling colour without a U, and I'm not a big fan of that, so let's go to English UK. So there we go, we've got our account settings changed. Let's come back out of that, and then I know that this survey start time and end time will be actually the time zone where I'm actually based. So surveyability, I'm just gonna leave this open for now because we're gonna send this in the chat a little bit later to allow you to have a little go at it. Survey abilities, we've looked at that. Inactive survey message. Again, this is just a custom message for if your survey is inactive, you can set a custom message or just leave it to Qualtrics default message. Those are some things we wanted to look at in responses. Let's jump on to security. So survey access. This is where we can say that the survey is available to anyone. That doesn't mean anyone can just stumble upon it, because they'll actually need to have the link in some way to access it and answer it. But we've got two options here. If we're really trying to lock down this survey, we can make it just invitation only. We'll look at distributions in a second. We'll look at different ways you can send it out, but we can lock this down to be just invitation only, just select people from a mailing list, for example, or available to anyone. So we paste the link out, we send that out to everyone, and anyone that's got that link can answer the survey. I'm going to keep this available to anyone because I know I'm going to be posting that link in the chat, and I want you all to be able to have a go at answering it. And then again, we've got some self-explanatory ones. We've got password protection. We've got where we can just embed it on just a specific website, so people can only get it from a specific website. Prevent multiple submissions. Again, that's a fairly obvious one, so that people can only answer it once. Bot detection is something worth looking at. Now, both these are worth looking at together, really, in that they're not foolproof. You can try and lock this down so that it's going to detect bots. You can try and lock it down to prevent multiple submissions so that people can't spam it, but generally there's always a way around it. If someone really wants to try hard to spam your survey, there will be a way, and that's the same with any survey tool, unfortunately. That's just part and parcel. It's quite rare. I mean, I can't think of any instances while I've been at the university as to where someone has actually gone and spammed something, but it's worth knowing that they're here, and this will prevent most people from actually submitting multiple times and hopefully filter out some of those bots. We've also got things like security scan monitor, relevant ID, preventing indexing so that we're blocking it so it doesn't appear in search engines. So if I Google Simon's excellent cheese survey, that it doesn't come up in Google, which I'm happy with. I don't really want people to be Googling that and jumping onto this demo example. And various other things such as uploaded file access, who can view the files when things are uploaded in that sense. And this very important one here again, anonymized responses. So if you are doing an anonymous survey, again, we don't want a question that's got your name or your email, and we're not going to collect anything like that. But by default, it has an option to collect IP addresses, that will collect IP addresses to try and prevent those multiple submissions and so on. But if we were doing a truly anonymous survey, we can toggle this setting on to make sure that it's not tracking anything from them. It's not tracking IP address, not tracking location data or contact info. So again, be wary of that if you are creating a anonymous survey. Post survey, again, lots of things we can do here. We can choose custom messages to send a thank you email. We can create a new one. And Qualtrics saves all these kind of custom things in its library. So you've got your own library where you can pre-save messages. So if you're creating lots of these surveys, it's going to cut down on your workload because you might have lots of different templates and such and messages saved within your library. Or we can just create a new one from here. So we can send a thank you email, we can give a message for someone revisiting a completed survey, we can do email triggers, so someone fills in the survey and then it triggers a certain email, we can edit the trigger and then we can choose the email, lots of things we can do there. And really that's the whole thing with Qualtrics. There's endless possibilities, it's just a little bit more time consuming. So the question you should ask yourself is, do I need to be in Qualtrics or could I achieve this through Google Forms? And last but not least, we've got manage our contact list. So we can add a contact list for a workflow. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but that's what we've got in our survey there. I don't actually want to have a contact list for this one, but I could upload a contact list through here. This is going to be a very slow menu. So in the interest of time, I'm going to actually just refresh Qualtrics and hope it doesn't die on me. Okay, right. Those are our survey options. Again, lots of things you can do. Be wary of those key ones when you go to send out a survey. Another thing we can do as well is we can lock this down to University of York only, but it's a little bit more difficult than if we were to do this in, say, Google Forms, where we can do this instantly. I'm going to show you this very quickly, as quick as I can. I'm back in Survey Builder here. I'm going to add a new question for a text entry, and I'm going to put UOY email. Okay, and this time Simon talked to us earlier about validation. We're going to toggle validation on. I could choose a content type to lock it down to just an email, but to make sure it ends in @york.ac.uk, I need to do a custom field here. So I need to do a custom field here. Now I'm selecting that it must contain here @york.ac.uk. So when someone puts an email address in there, it must contain @york.ac.uk. That's not going to stop someone making up one just to fill in the survey, but it might not be a valid email. There's no way for Qualtrics to check if it's legit on our directory as a valid email address, but at least it can check that @york.ac.uk is in there. And then we can choose a message there. I've already set up a custom one here in my library so that when I answer not a UOY address, it's going to ping up with a message to say, you need to be from the University of York. So if I save that, and I preview this very quickly, it's another thing with Qualtrics, it is a little bit slower, I find. Oh, there's Simon's lovely orange color in the background there. Do you like cheese? Yes. UOY email, john@hull.ac.uk. Next page. Should give me an error message here. Please enter a valid UOY email address. Okay, so we can lock things down in that sense. Going back to my survey, I actually don't want that question. So again, I'm going to 3-dot menu it and I'm going to delete that question. And then it will appear at the bottom in the trash here in the bin. So I could retrieve this later if I wanted. Okay, another quick thing that you might find useful. We've shown you previewing for testing things. Obviously, there's no substitute for human testing, but you could go into tools and generate some test responses and choose how many responses you want to generate to create some random responses so you can see how your survey is behaving. Again, we'd always opt for human testing above that. And it can be a bit annoying once you've got those test responses in there, you've got to then delete them to change to analyze your data and so on. But yeah, that's where generate responses are. Right, anyway, we've shown you loads of things. We've shown you how to build a survey and we need to show you how to actually send a survey. So we're finally going to move to a different tab. Instead of survey, we're now going into distributions. So the first time I go on distributions, I've got a tab like this. I've got some options I can send with Qualtrics. I can send an email. I can embed it on the web, or I can put it on social media and so on. The first thing I want to show is sending it with email. So if I went to compose an email, it's going to bring me up a little dialog box where I can choose my contacts. I can even go to list here and create a new contact list. Haven't got time to go into this just yet, but we could, if you follow through this menu, you'll taken to a menu where you can actually upload a CSV file or an Excel file full of your contacts to create that contact list. Again, lots of ways you can embed things in. We can choose what email address it's coming from, who it replies to, when to send it, subjects, and so on. But then the most important thing is what's going in this email. And you might be looking at this and think, what on earth is that? That is pipe text. That is Qualtrics' kind of clever language to take different bits of the survey and generate something here. So we could send a tech preview email to see what it's doing. And what it will do here is in that scary looking box there, it will generate a link for me. The reason it has this pipe text is, if I go into advanced options, you can see here the type of link I've created here is an individual link. What this means is that for each person it sends to, so let's say I was doing a very small contact list to send this to, just Simon and one other member of my team. If I choose individual links, the link that appears here for Simon will be different to the other person's link. That means that that link is bespoke to Simon for him to fill out. So we can create those personalized links here, and that's on by default. Another method is just using anonymous again. Remember, anonymous link, not tied to an individual, just an anonymous link. We don't know who's clicked on it. It's just the same link for everyone, okay? So 2 options there. Again, I'm not going to go too much into what you can put in your email. That's your choice. But lots of things we can do in terms of pipe text, in terms of choosing different options. So we could look at a question to say, do you like cheese? And we could say, we could put something in the email here in the pipe text. Oh, I see that you are a cheese lover because of this. Lots of things we can do with pipe text. Again, this is a very in-depth platform, lots of options available to us. But I'm going to go with the most easy way to send this out, which is the anonymous link. And this is what we do for pretty much all of them. So all of our surveys that I know that we work on, we use anonymous surveys. And we can copy this link here, this anonymous survey link. And I'm actually going to copy this straight into the chat now. And I would appreciate it if anyone has the time to very quickly fill in that survey and just put some random answers in just to allow us to see what happens when we get responses in. And again, this is really useful because you've got this link, you can paste it anywhere, you could choose a hyperlink in an email and create your own emails within Gmail or whatever mailing program you use. So yeah, I tend to prefer anonymous survey links in order to send your surveys out. So other options here in terms of QR codes and downloads, again, haven't got quite time to go into that. But if I go into my data and analysis tab now, I should hopefully, or it doesn't look like anyone's finished it just yet. Or is it just taking some time to bring this to me? Maybe. Oh, someone's completed it. It looks like we're taking a bit of time for that to actually come in. But these 2 tabs, data analysis and results, is where you should see things coming in. Getting some spammy messages now. Okay, so I can see in my results an overall sense of what's going on. So I can see that 86% of people like cheese. That's fantastic. This is taking a little bit longer, unfortunately, to fully get everything in. But these are the tabs where I can start my data analysis. Hopefully, there we go. Excellent. So now in data analysis, I can see these individual responses. So if we did have an email question there, we could see people's email, we could delete responses, we could view the response, we could export it to PDF, we could do lots of things here. And one thing I want to show you is exporting these. As Simon said earlier, a major drawback of Qualtrics compared to Forms is the inability to export live data. In Google Forms, we can link a sheet and we can see that data coming through in real time, and that's really useful for certain processes and so on. But here we kind of get a snapshot of a single point in time. You've seen me hovering over this export and import button here. Of course, we can import data, but if we wanted to export data, we've got lots of different options. We can export it to a CSV sheet, which is essentially just like an Excel sheet with just the simple values. We could even go into Google Drive and export it as a Google Sheet, but just be aware that it's just going to be the snapshot in time as to when you exported it. So it's less useful in that sense in terms of linking it to live data, but there we go. We do have our results there. Okay, so that has been a real whip through of the features of Qualtrics. Now, as you've seen, Qualtrics is a huge program, and Simon and I have had to be very selective to try and fit in the basics to set you away with the essentials to actually go and create a survey, look at the options and distribute this. But there's far more it can do. This is the first time we've run this as a bite size, so I'd be interested to see your feedback on it. as you leave the session, you'll be met with a little survey. We'd appreciate you filling that out. But some closing thoughts from me is that you really need to consider, before cracking open the Qualtrics box, can I do this in Google Forms? Is Google Forms going to be enough for me? Because you've seen this is quite an in-depth program, and you might spend more time creating a survey than what you would in Google Forms, and Google Forms can do most of the things that Qualtrics can do. It's just that Qualtrics allows you for things like workflows and quotas to set certain parameters so that things can close down at a certain point. You can stop taking responses on certain questions. There's lots of things available, but so we're just dipping a toe into the water on Qualtrics today to get you set up with it. What I would say is, if you've got any questions after this session, we're a bit tight on time to fit them into the session today. Drop us a reply to the email. I'm going to send out the recording of the session today. You can watch things back. If you come up with any questions, drop us a reply to that email. But you can also ask any ongoing questions at itsupport@york.ac.uk. And even better than that is the Qualtrics support pages. Qualtrics have these fantastic support pages, very in-depth, that will probably get your answer to your question much quicker than we ever could. Any closing thoughts from yourself, Simon?
No, I think that's been pretty thorough. But yeah, I'd just recommend, if people are thinking about using it, just have a play around with it. Make some, sort of dummy surveys that you can have a go with, send to colleagues, because it's one of those tools that the more you use it, the more familiar it becomes and the more sense it makes, I think. And yeah, if you do have any queries, absolutely send them through itsupport@york.ac.uk, and they'll probably get passed through to our team.